All right, here we go. Let's get we're gonna go live here just in a second. Let's get that cool theme song going so everybody can hear it. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Shootin the Shiznit, Shootin the Shiznit, best little wrestling podcast in the business. Your host BT, and all his guests. You'll never know who he'll have next. Shootin the Shiznit, Shootin the Shiznit, best little wrestling podcast in the business. Shootin the Shiznit.
Hey, we're live from STS Studios in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And I have, you can see him right here, live on Facebook. And we will go live on YouTube for the last part of this interview. But it's the one and only Jeff Osborne. How the hell are you, Jeff?
How have you been, man? It's been decades.
Well, we actually talked about 5 years ago. We did a podcast together. That's a crazy thing. But us, man, we go way back, don't we? How long? It was 30 years, maybe?
It was like
my math's not good. So
1989, 90, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. We go back way far. And it was because I was doing the Wrestling Riot and you started doing a podcast, and not a podcast, a newsletter back then, the same thing now. I got a question because I know you probably said this on Cassette Wrestling News before, but my main question I start with everybody is, how did you become a wrestling fan? What turned you on about professional wrestling?
It's probably going to be the same damn thing you said. I mean, at 4 years old, I'll never forget. I started kindergarten at 4, I guess, because my parents didn't want me around. But Channel 7 wrestling, man, it was probably Duelist back then. I saw a bad guy on TV named Jerry Lawler, and he kept pinning this guy and getting a 1-2 and pulling him up by the hair. And I'm like, man, it captivated me. That particular match captivated me. I don't even know who it was back then. I can't even find that match anymore because it probably predated people being able to tape television.
Right. Yeah.
I remember being at my neighbor's house, and I think I moved away from that place in 1979. And I know this was probably 1974, 75. But I remember watching it, and it just captivated me. And Lawler was the greatest bad guy ever. And I don't know what drug I like Lawler, no matter what role he was playing back then. But that just got me, and it hooked me, and somehow I convinced my dad to take me there, and I was hooked forever. Once I saw it live, man, I was hooked forever. Evansville Coliseum, I mean, legendary stuff in there.
That's what I was going to ask you. So you've been in Evansville pretty much your whole life, and been around the world too. I want to talk about that here in a minute, but the deal is that Evansville was a stop. So there's going to be some new fans here. But there is some old people that listen to me and you. But there's going to be some new fans. Memphis Wrestling would had a circuit, and they hit certain towns, and Evansville was one of them. And they went every week, and then they kind of cheated on the TV, where they actually took the TV tapes, and you were a week behind everybody else, right?
Week behind.
And so they did that all the time. And so they talked about, some people would save the tapes. Cornette said when he got there, he tried his best to save as many tapes, because when they got so many of them, they would start erasing them, recording over them, because the tapes cost so much. So they would have been worth tons of money by now. So you're a fan, you're growing up. Now, I know you wrestled, but did you wrestle before you started Cassette Wrestling News or after Cassette Wrestling News?
No, much like all of us, we just wanted to get in the business. I'm sure you're the same way. Like, man, I love this. I would give anything to be in this business. And it wasn't until, a couple years after I even stopped doing that I started training. I would talk to Eddie Gilbert almost definitely on a weekly basis, but sometimes every other day he would just call and he would tease the shit out of me. He would never give me information on what was going to go down on TV. And he's like, better watch Saturday. I'm like, why? He's like, it's going to be big. He's like, I mean, really, really, really big. And I'm like, what is it? He wouldn't tell me. What was that giant fireball that ended up being about 8 foot tall that he threw? This would have been like 90 in the 90s.
Yeah, we seen that a lot on television after it happened. Yeah, and I think it was even at the front of the TV show there for a long time.
But he gave me would teach me psychology, and even over the phone, I would start to understand. And then, of course, I got with Dutch, and Dutch is another guy who is vastly underrated as far as his knowledge of the business and psychology goes. And we were trained by these two independent guys in Kentucky they were just terrible. And they would get so mad because we would do our thing. Back then, we were stealing. We had satellite TV, which was a wrestling fan's dream back then.
Right. You had this big old satellite in your front yard. Is that what you had?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I had one too. I had a bootleg one, by the way. I could get all the channels.
Oh yeah. You got Florida, you got World Class, Polynesian Pacific, Mid-South. You had 50 hours a week of wrestling from all over the planet. While we were stealing Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Chris Jericho, we were stealing all these moves because we had the tape. I mean, we all had the tape hookup back then. And these guys in the dressing room go, where you learning all this stuff from? Like, I don't know. We just do it. So we were stealing all these moves because no one got Japanese tapes aside from the inner workings of our little
the little clique or the yeah.
And we started stealing the show, and I mean, I was scrawny. I was so skinny, and they hated that we would get over being so skinny, and they would look down on it. And I remember Dutch coming to our defense and basically going off on a dressing room one time, and everybody after that treated us with respect. But we got blackballed from several shows for doing the flippy floppies.
You was doing flippity floppity before it was cool, wasn't you? I mean, you could be on national TV now, so. This was before or after? I don't remember. Did you become a wrestler after Cassette Wrestling News or before Wrestling Cassette? After?
Yeah, it was way after. It was definitely probably 2 years after. And I still
tell everybody. Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
I still have dreams that I feel so bad that I didn't send the final issue out that I wanted to do. I still have.
Oh my God.
From 30 years ago. Oh my God, I got to get this cassette out. I can't believe, and I'm looking in my file box and I see everyone's name of who I screwed over, and you're in there, and I'm like, I got to get these cassettes out. And then I wake up, I'm like, what the hell do I feel? And I guess it hits me subconsciously that I ripped people off of like $3. But,
right. Well, that's when I quit mine. I sent out a note and said, if you want your money back, I'm going to send it to you. And I did. I sent it. Most people said, no, we're only paying like $1 for. But tell me, since me and you are continuous time, I wanted to talk about Cassette Wrestling News. I want you to explain what Cassette Wrestling News is. And I'm going to say this. I'm going to steal this from Stone Cold Steve Austin, who said, this was the first ever wrestling podcast right here, the Cassette Wrestling News. Tell me how y'all did it, what you did, just someone that you don't even know. Tell them what happened there. How did it come out? How did you mail it? I bet that was crazy.
Yeah, I actually started out with a newsletter. It was handwritten because I think I was in 7th grade. And I'm like, man, then I got a typewriter, a little peck.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, son of a bitch, man, what could be easier than this? Because this sucks. And I could just talk. We can talk about this crap. So I was already in metal music and stuff, and I had a Tascam 4-track recorder. So we got fancy, and I would have John Seaton come out of one speaker, me come out of the other. And I remember John Arezzi of Pro Wrestling Spotlight, probably the first pro wrestling radio show. He said, man, you really beefed up your production, didn't you? And I'm like, yeah, I turned the dials this way, and we both on. But it was cool. Basically me being lazy. I did the same thing with MMA years later. I did started out with the sheets, paper, and then I went to video. And I, ironically, UFC came back and bought my entire library. I was the only human being filming all that backstage stuff. But going back to Stone Cold, and I will never forget, I had heard through the grapevine, Eddie Gilbert told me, he's like, oh, Steve Austin got in trouble. He played the cassette on the, I guess the bus ride.
The bus. Yeah. I remember the story. The bus to Texas and back. He played the cassette on there. Yeah.
So never did I ever see any of the heels, much less faces, come off the stage at the Evansville Coliseum and walk to the concession stand. He walks over to me, and I thought that he was going to beat my ass or yell at me. Or he's like, hey, I got in a little trouble. I'm like, I heard. He's like, oh, well, he's like, F this place. He's like, I got to offer to go to Puerto Rico. We talked about this before too. And I said, I don't know if you should do that, man. I think you're going to get picked up. Plus you'd be bleeding every damn night in Puerto Rico. People throw all kinds of stuff at you. And he's like, you're probably right. And then, like we said, with you with The Undertaker, me with Stone Cold.
Right.
7 days later, he gets signed to like that $80,000 contract with WCW, and I don't hear from him for, I don't know, 20 years.
I was going to go to a Wizard World just to pay to see Mark, because I hadn't seen him in 30 something years. And I told this story. I took photographs of him in the graveyard in Jonesboro, and I take credit for him getting an Undertaker job. I don't know if it's true, but I did take photographs, so I haven't seen him. I was actually going to pay like $100 just to meet him to see if he remembered. I know he had to remember me. I mean, look at this face, Look, you can't forget that face. So, but yeah, it's just one of those things where you meet somebody on the way up. Paul Heyman's another guy. I talked to Paul, I guess about 5 years ago, I think, again, and just touch base with him. There's other guys that I can send emails with that was from those days. It's hilarious because you don't look at it that way. You look at it as, well, I was in the dressing room with that guy, and I'll talk to him. Dutch is one of them, a couple other guys that work in Memphis. But you had all kinds of guys where you were interviewing them. You interviewed one of the funniest interviews is Kerry. Was it Kerry Von Erich that didn't know what city he was in, right?
Yeah, I won't even get into the backstory of that, but I said, hey, Kerry, I do cassette wrestling news. You want to do a couple of IDs for me? It's whenever the guys would say, hey, this is such and such, and you're listening.
Right.
And he goes, hey, it's Kerry Von Erich, Modern Day Warrior. You're listening to cassette wrestling news right here in Louisville, Kentucky. Where the hell am I? And I was like, oh, damn. And I used it. I mean, I went ahead.
You did. You used it for the best. Yeah. It's kind of a promotion kind of thing.
Yep, those were the days, man.
And Kerry, I took pictures of Kevin, who told me he had a pink eye. That's the reason his eyes were pink that night. And then I was told, Dutch said he worked him, and it wasn't pink eye, so he was stiff as a motherfucker, as Dutch would say. And you interviewed, this is one of my favorite things, and I've been trying to get this from you for years. You don't even know where the cassette wrestling news is. But Lawler was pissed at me, extremely pissed. And so what did Jeff do? Jeff, being my friend, Jeff said, okay, Lawler, I don't want you to talk about Brian Tramel, because Brian Tramel was my friend. No, Jeff did it's like he's doing a promo for television. It's one of the greatest promos ever. It needs to be heard.
Oh, it was. He turned on me in a second. Like, we were all cool up until then. I'm like, hey, Joe Goodhart. He's like, oh yeah. And then I mentioned Brian Tramel. It's like, and then I'm like, oh damn! I was just asking what the hell went down, and he turned on me. And then after that, I asked him a few years ago. I was like, do you remember calling my answering machine, telling me that I need to call you back? Because I gave a kid some cartoons out of Pro Wrestling Torch, who worked at his dad pretty much ran the Coliseum, and Lawler saw that he had the cartoons out of the Torch, and that was what it was about. And he's like, you damn guys never wrestled day in your life, and you never ran a show. This is after I had started. So I guess this is after I stopped it, but I'm like, actually, I do run shows, and I have lost a lot of money doing it, and I do wrestle. And then he kind of, Silence had a little bit of respect, but he still cussed me out. But he does not remember it. I mean, it's been years and years, 30 years. He's met 1 million people. I mean, you got to look at it.
I said something, someone said something to me about the last time I seen Jerry. They said, you should get Jerry on your show and ask him about somebody. And I said, he won't remember them, because one of the last conversations we had was me and you had was I was talking to Jerry to talk to you. Get a hold of Jeff Osborne. You remember Jeff? He's in Evansville. Yeah. He wants you to come to this convention, and you did a big, huge convention. Right. And he goes, Brian, I don't remember anybody. And I'm like, okay. I said, but Jeff he did a cassette wrestling news, and I went through the whole deal. And he didn't even remember doing the promo on me, which that pissed me off. I mean, you're supposed to be remembering shit about me now. But he didn't even remember that. This was before the heart attack. And then I seen him after the heart attack, and he said he was a zombie. He was Walking Dead. So he's going to start doing conventions as Walking Dead. So, all right, man, we're going to take a commercial break, which what that means is we're going off Facebook Live, but you can still watch us on YouTube Live for another 15, 20 minutes. I'll put a link on these links, and you can follow along with us. And Jeff's going to tell, and it's not wrestling related, it's the greatest, go ahead, greatest part story ever after the commercial. All right, give me a second.
All right.
All right, here we go. I'll count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Back from commercial. We're just on YouTube, or if you listen to the audio version came out or is coming out on Saturday. Thanks for listening. Jeff Osborne. To me, Jeff, you was Cassette Wrestling News. That's how we met. And when I mention your name, I almost always have to put Cassette Wrestling News. But you told a story on Facebook one time, and I teased this. And I tell friends this story. It's one of the greatest fart stories ever. And I want to talk about this, because when you start working out, now, I guess about 5 years ago, I got in the best shape of my life. I'm a fat ass again. Well, I guess about 9 years ago now, I'm a fat ass again, but I got in the best shape of my life. If you work out, you understand eating protein, drinking protein, eating chicken, being so good putting in your body. But for some reason, you have the worst smells coming out when you're doing that. And so tell the worst fart ever. Jeff, you got to tell the story.
I was going to the post office, and you're talking about eating stuff like this.
There you go.
Black beans and refried beans. I was going to the post office doing my daily stop, and man, my windows were cracked just a little bit on each side, and I let one rip, and we're at a traditionally long stoplight in Evansville, Indiana. And then I hear the lady next door to me go, "God damn."
Now, Jeff, I'm gonna tell everybody. Next to him, he said, it's the lady in the car next to him with her window down too, and she smelled greatest part ever. I can't even top it. I'm not gonna top it. It's right there.
There's more.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah,
I go to the post office. I go mail my stuff. I come back out, open the door, and it about knocks me down and beats the shit out of me right when I open the door. And I'm like, how's a human being do this? And then later I go home. I take my kid to volleyball practice, and she accuses me of pre-shitting before I get in the car because it still stinks so bad from 2 hours before. That's a good fart.
That is a good fart, the best fart ever. Now, we all, as kids, and this is as adults, but guys, you got to remember at 12 years old is what me and Jeff, that's pretty much our level when it comes to parts or wrestling or anything like that. So that's kind of level of humor there is. But when you told that, I read it to my wife and I had the biggest laugh. And she, you know, she's just sitting there and she goes, ooh, you know, that's kind of what she says. And I'm getting but I have to tell it. If I'm in a group full of people that I haven't been with for a while, I'm going to say, especially if a fart comes up, then you have to tell about Jeff Osborne. All my friends know the story. He was at a freaking stoplight and the lady said he stunk. So there you go. All right, let's get back to the subject. Talk to me about, so you went from being a wrestler, being a cassette wrestler news, being a wrestler, and then getting in, and probably your biggest success, you made a reference just earlier, was Hook and Shoot. What made you, was it just what was going to happen next because you was a huge fan of Hook and Shoot? Of shoot fighting, or what made you do that?
I always got the tapes and all UWFI, which it was work shoot, but you still loved it.
Right, it was work. Yeah.
I saw UFC 1 and I'm like, man, this shit's fake. So I started training. And coincidentally, my instructor was already doing pancrase in Japan, Scott Sullivan. And I'm like, damn, there's a dude who fights in Japan. He's giving jiu-jitsu lessons, shoot boxing, fighting. So we started going there and started learning all this stuff. And UFC 2 comes out. I'm like, man, I still don't believe this crap. And then eventually I'm like, I'm going to run a damn show. I'm going to gather up people from around the United States and try to run a show. And I by that time it comes around, I'm like, okay, this is real. These guys really do hate each other or they respect each other. There was no, middle ground when it comes to MMA of that era. And eventually ran a show. I didn't mean to leave pro wrestling at the time. It just kind of happened. I think after I got into MMA, I did one final pro wrestling match at the Evansville Coliseum just because I wanted to do one there. And that was it. And, who would have thought I would ever be running shows at the Coliseum? And there were a couple shows, man. There were 3,000 people at least two of those shows I had there. It's unbelievable. We violated so many fire laws. It was and then at one point we did have to do like a nightclub thing where whoever had to go out and smoke, we had to let people in. We had about 70 people waiting to get in, and they didn't care. But that's after I had a partner, and we ran some of the best fights, some of the highest dollar cards ever for that time. But after me and him split, I focused on all locals and built major stars out of locals. And this was that time where people would come to like, hey, I'm coming to see Chris Jennings. He's in the second match. Well, he sold 200 tickets. Half of those leave, yeah, and then 100 more. I can let 100 more people in, and that's what was happening. It got crazy. There were 3 shows in that building where I walked out with 2 duffel bags full of money. I'll never forget those nights. It was insane.
Yeah, it was kind of like I remember started reading about it in the Observer, and Dave would put in the results, and then he said Hook and Shoot Jeff Osborne, and I was like, well, we weren't even in contact with each other during that time, and I was like, what the fuck's Jeff doing? God, what's he doing? And then it just kept getting where they say sell out again, and I wish I kicked myself in the ass for not going to Evansville and actually sitting in there. I talked to Cornette about this one time, and he said, well, he could get that many people in there, but I don't know. Maybe he was just bullshitting. And I'm like, no, Corny, it was one of those things where it just happened. And I know I've heard you say this and listen to you talk about it before, but your Hook and Shoot and the evolution of UFC in small shows. If you look at professional wrestling, it's the same thing. What happened was you had all these wrestlers that knew what they were doing, and then everyone started putting on shit shows because you could order a ring. Yeah. What happened to you is you was putting on quality shows, But then you had Joe Bob down the road who got him a ring and said he's going to put on some shoot fighting, right?
Yeah, it became, I think me and TJ Thompson in Hawaii and Monty Cox of Iowa, we were the only three that were doing it. And we ran quality shows. I mean, if you look back, because we were the first to do it, and I got Dan Lambert, who's a big wrestling fan, and he remembered me from The Observer and all that stuff. And
right.
He ends up approaching us and saying, hey, if I sponsored your show for $30, $40, or $50,000, can you get my guys fights? I'm like, yeah.
Oh, well, let me think about it. I'll call you back in a little bit. Yeah.
And that was when I was with my partner, and he focused more on the international aspect of it, which at one point we had a show so freaking big, we had to rent the Coliseum out for a Sunday and do a Sunday matinee show. But Dan was sponsoring the shows, and we were bringing in at the time, some of the best freaking talent on the planet. And it got us notoriety, but it wasn't selling us tickets. I mean, we were doing 1,000, maybe 12 to 1,500. And then one show did have a couple thousand people on it or attendance, but it wasn't until, we split, Ultimate Fighter hits, creates just that was the shittiest. I hate that era of MMA personally. But it created a big craze. All of a sudden, I got 1 million people wanting to train to fight, this, that. And all of a sudden, instead of having 2 or 3 local stars, I have about 20. And each one, you got to figure each one of them. I had one guy sell 280 tickets and another guy on the same show sell 220. So right there, you're, 500 tickets between 2 dudes. That's before we even go to the public. And then I had, 12 other locals on that show, and it just blew up. But I hate the era of Ultimate Fighter because that was it. Everybody started running turd shows. You went from having about 8 shows around the United States to probably 150. And it ruined everything.
Still have there was before, you would have either the boxing or the Ultimate Fighting. They remind me so much of bad independent wrestling. Not independent wrestling isn't good, but all it was who are these guys? Well, they're local guys. They sold tickets, which I did. I promoted a show one time in Selmer, Tennessee, and I had some names on it, maybe one, I think, and rest of them were local guys. But this one guy. This is horrible, but he had 3 matches and he wanted to have his 4th match, and I let him sell tickets, and he sold 150 tickets, and he was in the main event, and he pinned my heel champion. So there you go. I mean, in 6-man tag. So, and they were like, what the hell did you do that for? Well, he's in his hometown. I want him to win. He don't have to wrestle. Just put him in there for a little bit. So it's just one of those things that I did. Now you said just a few minutes about USC and how, that era was and what's going on. USC's still biggest business right now, but let's talk about your history with USC. I seen you on television, right?
Yeah. As with everything in our industry, I faked my way into doing everything, but if you remember some of those cassette wrestling news, we would do like Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett versus Moondogs commentary from Evansville with me and John, and we would have fun with it, goof off,
right,
just stupid stuff. And I learned all this from Lance. I owe Lance Russell so much, and I finally got to tell him and thank him.
You told me that, yeah.
Yeah, that meant so much to me because I would have been nothing without Memphis wrestling. I swear to God, I would be nothing if I didn't find out about Memphis wrestling. And anyway, coincidentally, I had one of the greatest fights of all time happen in Evansville between Aaron Riley and Eve Edwards, 2 of the nicest guys who were just unbelievable to one another. And they just had these wars. And I did commentary over that. I sent it in and they're like, hey, we want you to, come here and do a tryout. You got the job, but we want you to do a tryout. So I went there, and it was the worst thing I've ever done because it was me and Mike Goldberg. And the thing was, let's see if Jeff can work with IFB earpiece instead of an earpiece, they put like an answering machine, a two-way walkie-talkie. So they would cut me off, and it's like, rah, 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 rah. I'm like, okay, I could handle that in my ear, saying, Jeff, 10 seconds to package, or wrap it up in 5 seconds. But we both stopped talking to hear what's going on in this stupid ass answering machine. So it was terrible, but I had the job already, so I don't even know why I went. Ended up being on 9/11. So I wake up the next morning to the Twin Towers burning, got stuck there for 6 days. But luckily, the Fertittas owned 12 hotels, and I was all right. So,
oh, wow.
Wow. Yeah, that's it. And again, I call in my own match. It didn't hurt that the match I called and gave to him was one of the best fights of all time, too. So it made me look good, and I got that gig. I got overpaid for that, and they didn't catch it till about 3 shows in. Finally corrected it.
How did you just leave USC, or were you fired? And I remember you telling or seeing somewhere he's in some foreign country, and you went places with USC. But what all happened with it? What are some of the places you went? Except for the United States here in this area.
Well, me and my partner Miguel Iturrate, we always butted heads about stuff. If I made $100, he would spend 200 of it and hope that we made another 100 next week. But in hindsight, he did do wonders for us. He got us a gig in the United Arab Emirates, which is who UFC works with now, the same guys that I worked with in 1998, 99, and 2000. And I owe them a lot too. The two sheiks, Sheikh Hazza bin Zayed, and oh my God, I can't remember. Sheikh Taknoon bin Zayed. They're the guys who brought UFC over there too. So he gets us a gig videotaping their Abu Dhabi World Grappling Championships, which turned out to be the Olympics of grappling pretty much. And then they said, if you want to edit these, you can have all the video rights. I'm like, you just flew 16 of my guys here, round trip, $3,000 plus per plane ticket, put us up in a 5-star hotel, fed everybody, did all this stuff. And you want to give me the video rights to this? So this is pre-DVD. We get the video rights, put a 7 VHS package out for $200, ended up selling thousands of them, and built Hook and Shoot up even more and ran bigger shows. That turned out to be one of the biggest things ever. Then the following year, same thing. They gave us the video rights to 2001, and we did DVDs, which is unprecedented. We bracketed out like your 2 guys here, 2 guys here, and the sheiks loved it.
Oh wow!
They would go click right here for match number 2, and they could
right yeah.
And then they gave us a video rights to that, so that was another 6 figures that year that we spent on fights and stuff. We just built it up. I personally, from that era, the only thing I have to show for it is the actual Hook and Shoot belt, because we just blew all the money. I mean, I didn't get paid by any means until later, and we split, and I focused on local stars. That's when things changed.
And you, why did you leave USC? Did you leave it on good terms, or piss somebody off?
It was weird, man. Dana has not always been that tough guy that everyone sees on television. He actually had the producer of the show call me, Steve Tornabini at the time, who was like a little Eric Bischoff looking guy. And Steve goes, we're kind of changing things up on the next broadcast. We're going to have you do in-ring interviews, and Joe Rogan's going to do the commentary. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And they would not feed me anything to ask. So, and then they keep using this clip of me asking Tito Ortiz if he's going to fight Chuck Liddell. I get hit up about it all the time.
Right, yeah.
I did that on my own. Nobody told me to do it. They just wanted stupid fight interviews, and I'm not about stupid fights. I'm about the setup and the angle and the aftermath that sets up another. It's all wrestling to me.
Right.
God dang, they hated wrestling so much.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
But that's what, and it's funny because as it got big time UFC. They do promote the shows just like old school wrestling.
Exactly.
I want to talk about something real quick, and then I'll let you get out of here. We may have you on again. There may be some people with other questions about all the stuff you've done. You're a guy, Jeff, and you're really modest, but I'm going to tell you something. Almost everything that you put your mind to, it's successful. You've told me things that you've done in your personal life, and then you've told me, and I know about wrestling, I know about Cassette Wrestling News, I know about all that stuff. But you opened a comic book store. Why comic books?
Actually, someone pissed me off.
Oh, there we go. Revenge. There we go. I love this. Tell the story.
I was running the convention, the one Lawler, Dundee, Valiant, all those, and Lance came to.
Right. Huge convention. Let's go back to remember what we said about UFC and Hook and Shoot and what we said about wrestling and bad shows. You had the same experience with these conventions.
Yeah,
but go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're right. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but I mainly went to the biggest comic store in Evansville and said, hey, I want to include you guys, this and that. And we had our meetings there. And, I had a group of 8 people helping me. I never had help with anything. I did it all myself before, and I wasn't used to it. And we would all spend our money at the store, and I would take my flyers in there, and I would notice they would be gone. So then I had all these artists, and I support artists heavily, comic book artists, any kind of artists. So one guy who was a regular there, and he was there all the time drawing, he asked me, he's like, hey, I got a table at your convention. Can I get some posters and flyers and cards like you had? So I drop them off. I go back in there an hour later, they're in the trash. The owner of that store kept throwing our stuff in the trash, and then he's so stupid that he told all of his workers, don't you mention PopCon. You act like that convention doesn't exist, because it takes food off my table and money out of my pocket.
All the wrestling, wrestling. Exactly. There you go. That's what happened with wrestling. Don't do that show, because if you do that show, you can't do my show for $20.
So with that, I'm like, man, I'm doing a 1.5 day long show. I'm pushing thousands of people who don't even know about your business to your business, and you do this. And I kept turning the other cheek. So many other things happened. So I'm like, you know what? Screw you, man. I'm gonna open a store. That's right after I got my library bought out by UFC, and I didn't want to pay taxes, so I bought this big giant building and opened the store. And I didn't know it was gonna work. It's actually done pretty well. Arcade, records, video games and consoles, toys, collectible, all kinds of crap. It's turned out pretty well, and again, somebody made me mad, and I didn't want to pay taxes.
What about COVID? Has it hurt you with COVID?
Oh,
yeah. You don't have it. And the thing I loved about you, that you were bringing in so many kids that they didn't have anything to do in the afternoons. And I'm really, people say, well, video games, they should be out playing or blah, blah, blah. But that's not what it was. You was able to take these kids that probably wouldn't have went and played basketball anyway. And they made some friends. They played video games at your place. I love the idea of you being able to let them play video games for X amount of money and all that. But I'm going to turn this back into wrestling. Tell us the wrestlers, because I know a few of them. Tell us the wrestlers that's visited you since you've been in Evansville.
Oh, man. I just had Foley here. That was Foley's first appearance since COVID, and it was his last appearance that he's going to do. He's not going to do any more. He felt like he owed it to me because we postponed it. And I haven't seen him do anywhere else. He's really, cautious of COVID, which he did catch it.
Right.
I'm probably going to have Lawler back in a couple of months. I had Lawler here, and the line was just ridiculous. It was 4 hours. Lawler never took a pee break one time. If you didn't if you didn't have the money for a photo, he'd say, come on back here. Let's get one anyway. I was like, dang, this wasn't the Jerry we knew in 1989. He was very nice, and he took time for every single person. God, who else?
Well, Jeff, tell the truth. You paid him well.
I gave him more money than his regular guarantee.
There you go. I know how Jerry works, and he has a good time, but he does do that. He loves it, but he also likes the money, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no. But tell me, I know you had Jerry and you had people as personal appearances, but you had Vince Russo walk in.
Yeah, he was a regular every week.
He used to buy albums from you, didn't you? Yeah. Didn't you tell me that? Record albums?
Yeah, bro. Every week, bro. No, he was a good dude. I had no problem with him, but that's right around the time I quit watching wrestling, right around the Russo, where Cornette hates his guts.
Right.
And I wasn't watching around that time, so I have no judgment about Russo. I know he's done some weird stuff. Russo.
What about the WWE guys? I know they stop. I'm gonna give you some. People's gonna be hanging around your building like they used to the hotels. But I know AJ's been. Who's all the people that's been in there?
Xavier Woods, mostly those two guys. AJ, couldn't get rid of. Almost had to ask AJ to leave last time. He was having too much fun. My arcade guy, not a wrestling fan, and I didn't make that connection. So AJ he's starstruck by my arcade guy and all the stuff he has, and the boards and what he could do. And he's talking to Andrew, and he's like, yeah, man, I want to do this. And how do you do this? And then I go, Andrew, you want a picture with AJ before he leaves? And he's like, I guess. I don't know.
I love it. Not going to put him over. Yeah, I don't know who this guy is. I don't care. And then AJ is, I've seen him on, a couple of different shows on YouTube. And he is just a big kid with video games and goes way, way beyond what I would. But Xavier's like that too, right? I mean, he likes all the old systems. And do you still have games for like, I'm gonna tell you my favorite old system, all right? Okay. And you're probably gonna laugh when I tell you, but my favorite old system was Dreamcast.
Got plenty of them. I had a
awesome.
I had a Dreamcast.
Do they still put out games? Because I know Japan does that with some systems. No.
Yeah, they do. I mean,
games.
Not Dreamcast, but Dreamcast was the first UFC game. That's the only reason I bought it. And I remember you could be mounted.
You get on Wi-Fi too with it.
Yeah.
Well, not Wi-Fi, but there was a modem in it that said like that, and you could get online. But I don't know if you remember this, but Dreamcast was one of the first. They talked about they're not going to be. We're talking about video games instead of wrestling, but get over it, guys. They said they weren't going to be able to copy those games, and they have something special on them. And the reason one of the big reasons Dreamcast wasn't successful was we were all bootlegging. We was bootlegging all the games. Yeah. All you had to do was copy them and put them in the player, and they worked. You took away. There was a line at the very beginning of the software, and you just took that software out and you just bootlegged them. So Dreamcast is my favorite, and it had wrestling games on it too, so that I liked a lot. All right, guys. Hey, Jeff, I want to thank you for coming on, guys. Y'all know, same bad time, same bad channel on the best little wrestling podcast in the business. Be there. And I know, Jeff, you don't know this because you don't listen to my podcast, but I love my mama. Thanks, man.
Hey, I appreciate it. It's been fun, man. Definitely. I'll do it again anytime.
Yeah, that was fun. Man.